Funding for Frontline is provided by the annual financial support of PBS viewers like you.
His name was Clifford Boggess. He was one of 68 people executed in America last year. He had murdered 2 old men.
Dear Alan, enclosed, please find Xerox copies of 2 of my Death Row series ink drawings, my legacy to the world, my one big art project until I'm executed. I want to paint the inside of Death Row from the perspective of a Death Row.
I spent more than 3 years on the Boggess story, and in the end, probably knew him as well as anyone could.
It's Sunday now, Mother's Day. I never go to church on Mother's Day because I don't have a mother, and all the talk of mothers and how wonderful they are really depresses me.
Clifford Boggess was an artist, a musician, a Bible scholar, and a cold-blooded killer. A monster who spent his last years looking for redemption.
I only hope that you can find something relevant in my story and that I have something useful to say that will perhaps touch the lives of others.
This is the story of who he was and what he did and what was done to him. This is a common sight in Huntsville, Texas. An execution. There's one about every 3 weeks.
Stop the executions now! Stop the executions now! Solutions, not executions!
This one tonight is a little unusual.
Solutions,
The 100th man to be put to death in Texas by lethal injection. So there are more protesters than usual, and more photographers. Still, there isn't much to see, and the condemned man is practically unknown. So few townspeople pay much attention. Few people anywhere pay much attention. America, it seems, has become comfortable with capital punishment. I came to Texas death row in 1995, wondering if there weren't something important still to be learned. I wanted to find a typical murderer. Find out everything I could about him and his crime, and see if it still made sense to kill him. Whoever I found would need to talk honestly about what he was going through and what he had done. And that was going to be a problem. There were 403 men here awaiting execution, but almost all of them were appealing their convictions or their sentences. And the core of most of those appeals was innocence, or at least the pretense of innocence. I met plenty of men with interesting stories to tell.
You know who's going to get executed days before it occurs.
Men like Jim Vanderbilt, who survived 20 years on death row, acting as his own attorney.
You know how much of their appeal they've used up.
And Leslie Gosh, a convicted kidnapper and gunman who's legally blind.
You have a fairly strong case, right? Can you be any more specific?
I'd rather not.
But no one would talk about committing murder.
I wasn't involved in the murder, but I was nearby. I didn't know what was happening before, during, and in fact afterwards. I really didn't know till after the murder.
But Jim Bethard said there was someone I should talk to. His cellmate. A man named Clifford Boggess. Boggess, he said, is that rarity on death row, an admittedly guilty man.
Welcome to death row.
See, I'm home.
What struck me first about Clifford Boggess was his cheerfulness, and he was willing to talk about anything.
I have here something most people talk about or hear about but never mention, and it is an official state of Texas death warrant, actually called an order setting.
In the 3 years to follow, sometimes inside his cell or through its bars, sometimes in the interview room with bulletproof glass between us, he would talk about his crimes, about life on death row, about everything.
Of a substance or substances in a lethal quantity sufficient to cause the death of Clifford Holt Boggess. I like my little sticker here. Faith isn't faith until it's all you're holding on to, which keep inside of what I call my piddling box.
His cell was packed with visual aids to help him tell the story of his life.
Wooden mannequin here I call Woodrow. He's the only wooden mannequin on death row.
This one was about the new Clifford Boggess, the one who'd become a serious artist.
In my sketchbook, since I can't have models to pose for me all the time.
He also kept reminders of the old Clifford Boggess.
I have a photograph of one of my victims' tombstones. And this was taken for me by a pen pal who went there to visit. And whenever I'm looking at pictures of family and friends and things of that nature, I'm also reminded of this as a way to keep me humble.
His story bounced back and forth between the horrible and the ordinary.
That was me as a 4-year-old, by the way.
Through it all, the cheerfulness never deserted him.
Internally, emotionally, yeah, the death penalty and possible execution makes you want to scream, you know, ah, help, help, I'm facing this, I'm facing this. And then 2 years go by, help, I'm facing this execution. Then 3 years and 4 years, help. You know, and sooner or later, you just run out of breath. You get tired of hollering to everyone else about it, and you come to terms with it one way or another. In some ways, you try to think of this as being like a cell in a monastery of sorts, for me and for my Christian walk anyway. And try to get some solitude, try to get some prayer time.
Looking for an escape from hopelessness. He says he searched the Bible. And what he found there convinced him to start telling the truth about what he'd done.
And I've been telling the truth about it ever since.
After 9 years on death row, Boggess's appeals were all but exhausted, and he was thinking a lot about the end of his story, sometimes indulging in fantasies involving his hero, Vincent van Gogh.
Paintings of his room remind me a whole lot of this cell, just because it has such a narrow focus and there's not that many amenities at present. I'd like to go to France someday, go to all the great museums, look at all the great works by Van Gogh.
He knew very well that fantasy was not going to happen. He would never be going anywhere. But he had a real story, equally unimaginable, that he wanted to tell. Here was the man I was looking for. The man who might take me into the heart of the death penalty in America. The raw facts of Clifford Boggess's first murder are packed away in cardboard boxes in the attic of a courthouse in northern Texas.
You had an old man that wasn't capable of defending himself in the way a younger man would have done. It couldn't have been more brutal in terms of somebody setting out to kill someone and just doing everything he could to cause his death. One thing that distinguished this is that the defendant in this case, the one that committed the murder, grew up in this town, knew the old man, had probably been in his stores lots of times. So that there was that kind of sense of violation also in the community, that this was not just somebody from out of town that drove through and chose to knock off a store. This was somebody that grew up in the community, knew everybody in the community, knew this old man.
This is the town where it happened. St. Joe, Texas. Boggess is the most famous name in St. Joe. A man named Herb Boggess founded the town and built the first building, a saloon alongside the Chisholm Trail. Another Boggess was gunned down by the sheriff just outside the saloon door. Whiskey was such a staple of life here that when a man named Joseph Howell declined to drink, they named the town after him, St. Joe. Massive cattle drives came through, and outlaws, some of whom stayed. Boggess Street in St. Joe leads past Boggess Park and on to the cemetery, where several Boggesses are buried. And so is Frank Collier, Clifford Boggess's first victim. Frank Collier's brother, Jack, 95 years old, took me to see where it happened.
That's his store there, the two white fronts. He was stretched out right here. And his head was right here under some stuff, or on some stuff, I don't know what. But it was covered with blood. The floor and everything right there is where he bled to death. Well, that's where he cut his throat. He wasn't dying fast enough to suit him. After he'd stomped him, you know, and caved his face and lungs in, he drug him out here, cut his throat right there.
Make you angry?
Hmm?
Does it make you angry?
Does something to me. I never walk in here without I see him.
And then I asked Clifford Boggess to tell me the story from the beginning.
I'm thinking I'm doing good. I started putting a little money back, saving a little money, thinking, aha, I'll save up that money and go back to college. And I'm driving home one day, and the motor in my pickup blows the rear main seal, all the oil shoots out the back, and the motor's ruined. And I can fix it, but it's going to take all that money I just saved to get myself back into college. This was like the day I snapped and decided I need some money, and I'll go get it from whomever I need to. The first one I thought of was Frank Collier back in St. Joe. And I didn't have a gun at the time, but I'm thinking, well, I'm big enough and he's old and I got a pocket knife, I can go in there with that and do it. And I hitchhiked a ride from Gainesville to St. Joe with some old man who'd been doing a lot of drinking that day. Got him to drop me off at the city park. Once I was in Boggess Park, I took out of my pocket some previously purchased super glue and coated the ends of my fingertips with super glue to eliminate fingerprints without having such a noticeable thing as gloves on my hands in the middle of a summer's day. Telling myself, even though you're nervous right now and excited and the adrenaline's flowing, stay calm and walk slow so you won't be picked out of a crowd. So I casually walk up to a store like it's no big deal. And on the inside, all my internal alarms are going off. I'm just as nervous and scared as I can be. I've already made up my mind before I walked in the store that I'm going to kill him. I was in the store alone with Frank. I walked behind a shelf and took the pocket knife out of my pocket. I held up the pocket knife where he could see it as I reached for him, and I said, "This is it, Frank." And as I grabbed him around the throat with my arm, he said, "Oh," and it was just, there was fear in it, there was pain in the sound of it that only an old man could make. And my grandpa being old as well, it really bothers me to this day, the sound in that voice. I was very mentally active during all of this. I was scared, but, oh, and I know it doesn't sound right, but I was in complete possession of my mental faculties. People coming in, what steps to take next, all the mechanics of what I was doing, I was completely mentally aware. Cut his throat, and then just for overkill, what if this doesn't kill him? What if I need to do more? Because he was still breathing. I proceeded to stab him in the Adam's apple and larynx area 5 or 6 times.
Was there some anger in the brutality?
More than I expected. I don't know where it came from. Once I started attacking Mr. Collier, an hatred and an anger came out that I didn't know was there. It was no longer just to kill him, but also hurting him just for the sake of hurting him, just to be brutal.
Within days of the murder, police were beginning to hear Boggess's name. He was bragging about it to friends. At the time, he was living 20 miles from St. Joe in Gainesville with a woman named Phoebe Bowes. I went looking for her from one apartment house to another in Gainesville, directed by acquaintances who said she was practically in hiding, constantly moving, though it was 10 years after the murders. It took me several weeks to find her, and she did seem all but petrified with fear, still frightened of Clifford Boggess. She described him as a Jekyll and Hyde.
When I met him, he was a wonderful human being. I mean, completely, he was totally a wonderful human being. And one night he asked me, he said, what would you do if I disappeared for a week? And I thought, well, I don't know, I would, that's your business. And when he came back, he killed somebody, Well, I didn't really believe it. He came back because people spout their mouth off and everything. I hadn't heard anything about it. So, I didn't believe it. I can't imagine anybody enjoying something like that. It made him want to enjoy sex more.
When he talked about murdering a man?
Yes. When he talked about the sound of the blood and the feeling of the warm blood.
The second murder occurred August 17th, barely 3 or 4 weeks after the first one. Phoebe Bowes, whom I was living with, I was out of money again, and I had told her about Frank Collier's murder, and she seemed all right with it at the time. Of course, I also threatened her and said, if you ever tell anybody, I'll kill you. Don't know that I would have killed her, but it sounded good at the time. I was really playing tough for her. I asked her if she knew of anyone similar to Frank Collier who had a lot of cash money in their pockets. I didn't say it had to be an old person. I didn't say it had to be a man or a general store. I just asked for someone that carried a lot of cash in their pockets. She told me about a man named Roy Vance Hazelwood in Whitesboro, Texas.
And he talked me into going to Whitesboro one day, and we got over to Whitesboro. And I told him, I said, you take me home. Because he was talking about this on the way over there. I said, you take me home. He was driving my car. So he took me out in the country and he dumped me out.
I went into town, found the general store, parked the car in the back, walked around the front, walked in, and then the man's granddaughter came in with a carload of her friends to get some gas.
Lisa Hazelwood was 16 years old when she walked into the middle of her grandfather's murder.
Go ahead, Daddy.
She and her father, Jim Hazelwood, were so traumatized by what happened that day that this is the first time they've been back to the now deserted store in 10 years.
With me, well, I was closer.
Lisa says her grandfather was nervous about something. And then she saw the other man.
There and looking up and down, and I can tell you to this day he was wearing blue jeans, white tennis shoes, a white t-shirt with his sleeves rolled up, dark hair, and standing there.
Her grandfather said peculiar things to her, calling her son, as he practically shooed her out of the store. She is now positive he knew what Boggess was going to do and was desperately trying to save her.
When I heard her refer to him as Grandpa, it struck a chord in me, because my grandpa is the man I love most in the world. I almost backed out at that moment, but at the same time I decided I'm already here, I've already committed myself, the time to do this is now. He's showing me different things. We go behind the counter, and that's when I saw a sawed-off double-barreled 20-gauge shotgun behind the counter. I picked it up, and he told me, be careful, that's loaded. And I checked it, and it was. I clicked off the safety, raised it, and leaned it out towards him and shot him the first time in the back. At the moment, the thing that shocked me the most was that this was not like TV. This was not like Hollywood. He didn't fall the way a Hollywood stuntman does or whatever. In fact, and I don't say this to be cruel to the victim's family or anything, because I know it sounds horrible. It was horrible. But it was as if you had a puppet on a string and someone just cut the strings. He dropped that quick. It just crumpled completely.
This is the area that his body was found in. This is the blood area that was cut out by. And
Mr. Hazelwood kind of rolled over on his back and started to sit up and look me in the face with this questioning look in his eyes, like, why have you done this? What are you doing to me? And that was the hardest part of it, seeing that. I'll never forget that look on his face. But at the same time, it didn't deter me from the task at hand. I leaned forward and shot him a second time in the chest. Then the gun was empty.
I've never heard how long after I left he killed him. But I don't feel like it was but just a few minutes.
And when he came back and picked me up, he threw that man's wallet in my lap with his picture showing him blood on it.
The next day, Phoebe Bowes told the police that Clifford Boggess had done both murders.
We pretty much had the location where he was staying pinpointed. And at that point, our units moved in on him. And when the marked patrol units turned on their lights, officers were able to take him out of the vehicle without any incident whatsoever. He was very sullen, very cold, like nothing in the world was wrong. The game's over. You got me. But I'm damn sure not going to say anything about it. You know, this is my thing. Take me on to jail, whatever you got to do. He acted like he didn't care. This guy was almost proud to be a criminal. I'm the baddest guy in town. I'm the John Dillinger of North Texas. You know, I'm going to do what I want to do, and if you catch me, that's okay, but I'm going to have fun until you catch me.
The trial of Clifford Boggess in October 1986 was quick. The best the defense could hope for was a sentence of life in prison. Scrambling for some reason why Boggess should not die, his attorney played to the jury's emotions.
I pointed out all the positive character traits that he had accumulated throughout his life. His grandmother kept virtually every honor he'd ever had. He was an athlete. He was a star on the football and basketball team, and yet at the same time he was one of their best students. He graduated with honors. He was active in church. He played the pianos. He was especially talented with the piano. People sought him out to play at their weddings. There was a little mold. You've seen one of those where kids do a mold of their hand and put it on a paper plate and hold it up, and it says their names. And this one, it had a tiny hand. And I held it up and I said, you know, what you have found by your verdict is the hand that made this mold is the hand that slew the victim in this case. You've got to decide what you're going to do with the fact that when you kill the man, you kill the little boy inside. And the little boy that wrote this poetry and placed his hand on this mold and wrote those lovely notes to his grandmother and played those pianos is still inside this man. Don't kill him too.
But even as the trial was underway, Boggess was busy ruining his chances of mercy. From jail, he wrote his cousin saying he'd kill the judge if he pronounced the death penalty. And he wrote Phoebe Bowes, promising to find some way to kill her. "I'll get you for what you've done to me," he wrote her. "Lucifer, my Lord Satan, he and I shall see your soul burn in hell." She testified against him and produced that letter. The jury took just 2 hours to decide on the penalty. Death.
He had no feelings as we would have of emotions. And I think that's, when you talk about psychopaths, I think that's what you're talking about. A psychopath is just a cold-blooded killer.
He wasn't scared at all. He was tough. He was vicious.
You're afraid of him even now?
Oh, boy.
Why are you so afraid of him?
Because he didn't have a heart.
Clifford Boggess, at age 21, did seem to be exactly the sort of person capital punishment was intended for. How did that happen? How did the smart, talented, sweet little boy become such a man? Boggess told me he hated his hometown, St. Joe. Never felt part of it, he says. Never felt part of the Boggess family. And he wasn't born a Boggess. He was rescued from a Georgia orphanage by a couple named Steve and Shirley Boggess when he was a year and a half old. And when they divorced, he was sent to St. Joe to live with his adoptive grandparents in their little house by the creek. He was 4. His grandmother, the person who should know more about Clifford than anyone, still lives there. She says she still loves him, but it's too painful to talk about him. She did give me a picture of him at age 4, when he first arrived. She said he had had intense nightmares at that age, about a tunnel and a light. He doesn't remember those nightmares, but he does remember falling asleep at night, listening to his grandfather's records on an old phonograph. Beethoven, Bach, Chopin, Scott Joplin, and his favorite, his former teachers and schoolmates remember him as a good pianist with big hands, polite, but with an explosive temper. A good football player, not especially talented, but he played very hard. Everyone agrees that Clifford Boggess craved attention.
They're pushing me in the back.
The shop next to the old Boggess saloon used to have a piano in the back room. Clifford would wander in and play it. He had learned to play his favorite song, played it all the time. It made him think of getting away, going to some better place. Like his grandmother, others in St. Joe who knew Clifford best shied away from talking about him. The editor of St. Joe's weekly newspaper, Sonny Cole, perhaps wanting to avoid opening old wounds, seemed scarcely to remember Boggess, even though Boggess had worked for him, and they have recently corresponded.
Yeah, he played football. I'd even forgotten about that.
And Mr. Cole had trouble remembering the Collier murder even though it happened just 1 block away, and he covered it for the paper.
Did you know that he might be connected to this one?
I don't recollect whether immediately there was a connection or not.
I came across another story Cole had covered 4 years before the murder of Frank Collier. Another story about a murder in St. Joe. Someone named Boggess was arrested for that one, too. Not Clifford Boggess, but Carl Boggess, Clifford's uncle.
What's the deal there?
I think he became a suspect in that. I don't recollect exactly what the connection was. I haven't read this in quite some time, but I think he was a suspect in that.
Carl Boggess was never tried for the St. Joe murder, but he did rob a bank in California in the 70s, shot a policeman, and served time in Folsom Prison. Clifford had idolized his uncle.
Hi, is Carl here?
Carl and his family live in the house next door to his mother, Clifford's grandmother. They were no more eager to talk about Clifford than she had been.
We're here to live our lives. He's going.
Yeah.
It's what he leaves behind.
But one day I found Carl outside alone, working on a truck, and we did talk.
I'm almost scared of him.
Carl said he could see there was something very wrong, something missing with Clifford when he first arrived in St. Joe.
He's crazy.
Crazy.
We didn't act like normal people.
In what way?
It's just the way he dealt with things. I could see it. I seen the same feelings in his eyes as I used to see in old crazy some bitches up there in Folsom. They didn't care. They were all screwed up, you know, but we don't go around killing people. I've shot some people in robberies and stuff, but I never went into to do it, you know. I went in to rob it and it turned into a gunfight or something, yeah. But Clifford just went into it with murder. He planned on murdering people when he went into it.
Clifford agreed that there had always been something wrong. He mentioned it in a letter to me.
I can remember at the age of 6, after receiving a whipping for something I'd done, plotting in my mind how I could stand on a chair behind a door with a piece of 1-inch pipe in my hand and beat my grandpa in the head when he came through the door as retaliation for the whipping he just
And always he has been fixated on the mother he never knew.
It's Sunday now, Mother's Day. I'm not going to church today because it's Mother's Day. I never go to church on Mother's Day because I don't have a mother, and all the talk of mothers and how wonderful they are really depresses me. And with my dad and grandpa dead now also.
One day when he was 8 or 9, Clifford left his grandparents' house and began to walk. He walked all the way to the next town and then kept walking, 10 miles. When he reached his piano teacher's house, he asked to come in and rest a while. He told her he was running away from home to find his mother. The search for Clifford Boggess's biological mother and what she might reveal about the creation of a murderer led to Alabama. The search came much too late to find her. She had been dead for 20 years. Her name was Mary Elizabeth Mann. She had died a horrible death, and so had 3 of her children. She had 10. Clifford was the youngest.
Film crew to interview an inmate.
Okay, sir, if any of you have your wallets or any...
I found Clifford's oldest brother, Willie Joe Mann, in the Alabama State Prison, serving time for child molestation.
3 of us had the same mother and father. My mother and my dad were living together, like, you know, husband and wife, but the kids after that, none of them belonged to my dad. He took the kids he knew didn't belong to him, even after they were divorced, and he raised us. You know, he did the best that he could with us. After Clifford was born, I can remember Mom bringing him to my dad's house, and I remember her and Dad having a discussion about her leaving him there with my dad, and he told her that he had all that he could handle right then, you know, more than he could handle. Well, then the next time I saw my mom was she didn't have Clifford, and I didn't know until years later that she had gave him up for adoption. She could be as loving and caring as anybody you wanted to see, but then she could also be as spiteful and hateful as anybody you ever wanted to meet. She could be as abusive as anybody you wanted to meet, and she was at times.
Mary's sister, Jennifer, still lives in Alabama.
Tell me about your sister, Mary Elizabeth.
Always wanted attention, but she felt like she didn't get.
Was she having trouble with alcohol or drugs at that
Yes,
time?
she was.
Which?
Both.
How'd she treat the kids?
I was kind of hoping you wouldn't ask that, because she was an abusive mother. I know that there was several instances of child abuse. Some of them I could tell you about, some of them I would prefer not to, because they're so horrendous that you probably wouldn't believe them.
Darrell? This I want to ask you. The directions right. The Center Hill Market.
Clifford's sister, Debbie, lives in the backwoods of northern Alabama. Debbie would paint the darkest picture of life with Mary Elizabeth Mann when Clifford was an infant. She herself is still scarred by the experience.
She was on so many drugs, she didn't even know what she was doing. I've got scars all over my body where she mistreated me, hit me with adges, knives, just anything she could pick up. She was drinking and using drugs when she was pregnant with Clifford and Bubba and, you know, at least half of my brothers. Probably with me too, I don't know that, but I do know that she was when she was pregnant with Clifford. I remember the day she brought him home. And she brought him in, put him in the bed, and she had to leave and go get her some drugs and alcohol. And he wasn't like 3 days old. And she had to have that more than staying there with her baby. I do remember that.
After more than a year in an orphanage, Clifford was adopted. His new mother was Shirley Boggess, a sailor's wife. She says the little boy wanted to be hugged all the time. But 2 years later, when Clifford was not quite 4, Shirley and Steve Boggess divorced, and Steve shipped off to Guam. Shirley, penniless, allowed 4-year-old Clifford to be taken to Texas to be raised by Steve's parents. She believes now that it was a terrible mistake.
He was angry, and it's understandable. He felt that I'd abandoned him. And sometimes I blame myself, although he has told me repeatedly, it was not your fault, Mom. But I feel like that maybe if Steve and I had stayed together, had not divorced, that Clifford might have been different. He was a wonderful child, and he's still my baby.
the little boy never did find the mother he was looking for. As a teenager, he would get to meet and spend a little time with his adoptive mother. But it would be many years before he discovered the truth about Mary Elizabeth Mann. The more I learned about her, he said, the more I could see myself. By then, he had killed 2 people and was on death row. By the time I met Clifford Boggess, he had been on death row for 9 years and had undergone a transformation, or so it seemed.
How long have you known him?
Man, since just about the time he got into death row. He was on lockdown for a few months and they moved him to the work program, and I was his first cell partner in the work program.
His cellmate, Jim Bether, says he knows the changes in Boggess are real.
April of '88, wow. It only seems like 30 years.
How was he then?
Well, he was pretty green. I mean, he was still Cliff back then, you know, but he's changed a lot since then, too. I've seen the guy, he's grown up a lot since he's been in here. He's developed as an artist in here. That's the big thing that I've seen change, is the way he's developed as an artist. And his religion, he's developed a very close relationship with Jesus in his life, too. I mean, that's probably the defining thing for Cliff, you know. And I've seen all those changes come through. I can remember when he couldn't pick up a pencil and paper and so much as draw a cartoon hardly at all. And now he's one of the better artists around here. And I've watched those changes come, you know, and it's interesting to watch somebody change and grow like that. We're not supposed to be able to change. That's why we have the death penalty. They're wrong about that. A lot of people do. Cliff's a prime example of people who've changed since they've been in here. Whatever it was that led him to screw up in the world, there's remorse for that, and if he could do anything to change it, he does. It bothers him every day of his life.
Now that Boggess has dropped all claims of innocence, his only hope of avoiding execution is to convince a federal judge that his value as an artist and a Christian warrants a review of his death sentence.
I had not seen Cliff for quite a while in person because I'd been working on his appeals. These paintings were going to be the new evidence. It was reasons why Cliff Boggess should not die. And I asked him to let me know where his paintings were, how I could locate them so I could show these to the judge. He calls this family, and as you can see, it's fairly complex. This is Cliff's rendition of a friend of his from Germany that's been a pen pal of his since she was 19 years old. This is what he thinks she probably looked like when she was a little girl. This is the horror within. It's his way of trying to release some of the, as he described it, some of the anger he had for himself.
His early self-portraits reveal a Clifford Boggess much more in character with his monstrous acts and the resulting torment of death row than the face he wears now. Later, his paintings softened and avoided the subject. Had he driven off the demons with his relentless cheerfulness and devotion to Jesus, or had he only hidden them?
When the time of my execution is finally here, will I face death with strength and dignity, unwavering in my faith in God and in Jesus Christ as my Savior? Will God strengthen me in that hour of need? Will the Spirit give me the words to say which will make the end of my earthly life a powerful witness for God's Son?
Religious conversions are common on death row and hard to verify.
Will I be strong for God?
Is this one real or a sales pitch?
Some of the things that I think about and wonder about while I'm down here, I don't want people to think that I'm not thinking about what I've done and what's going to happen to me. I'm not distracting myself totally with artwork or television.
Clifford Boggess has said he'd like to get a chance to say how sorry he is.
I bet he would. He might convince some people that he's the new boy, and he's God's boy, but he never convinced me. Anybody that could do what he did, they couldn't change. They're that way. Why, you think that you could knock a fella down and stomp him with big heavy shoes on, leave your shoe prints on his chest and his face, and then cut his throat and never be a new fella? I don't. I just don't think that he makes that talk now trying to get out, of course, that he's God's boy now. And he's guilty of everything that he did, but he's changed. He's God's boy now.
In Whitesboro, Lisa Hazelwood has spent the years since her grandfather's murder reliving that day over and over, wondering if she could have saved him, and wondering about Boggess, despising him, but feeling confused about whether he should be executed.
My name is Lisa Hazelwood. I would be interested in what you wanted to say to me and how you feel about killing my papa.
For a long time, she talked to no one about it. Finally, she consulted a therapist who advised her to make her grief known and to seek answers to her
What were
questions.
you thinking when I walked into the gas station that day?
She has decided to write to Clifford Boggess.
If I had been alone, would you have killed me too? Why did you choose to destroy my family? I am haunted by what you have done almost every day of my life. Try to put into words what was going through your mind and what led up to you killing him. I need to try to understand why.
Lisa Hazelwood's letter reaches Boggess on death row, just as his longtime pen pal, Connie Crispin, arrives from Germany to visit him.
I want to hug you from a distance. I want to get closer to you. Good to have you back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back here.
Wish I could give you a hug.
Their correspondence began as part of her work with Amnesty International, which opposes capital punishment.
Picture of you with those stockings.
In the 6 years since, they've become such close friends that she once visited him on her honeymoon.
Well, he's my best friend I have. He's like my big brother.
Not romantic or,
No.
or sexual at all.
No, absolutely not. And we clarify that on every visit again, because it's very important for both of us to make sure. And of course, for my husband, that's very important too, because he's at home and I'm here and I could do whatever without him knowing it.
Without sounding like I'm making light of
On this visit, more than anything, Boggess wants to talk about Lisa Hazelwood's letter.
Over and over, she keeps asking, why, you know?
Of course.
The way she worded one of her questions was, why did you kill my pawpaw? That's what she called it. Yeah, and you know, just hearing the love that she feels for him, and this was her pawpaw that she called it, you know, just, oh, man.
And you realize...
I mean, it just kind of settles on me all over again, just exactly what it was I did. She actually asked what things happened in my life that led up to me being the kind of person that would do this sort of thing.
Just talk to her as if you would talk to me. I mean, that's a little hard, I know.
I can't talk to anybody the way I talk to you.
No.
Best friend.
Yeah. I know, it's hard.
Very hard. It'd be easier to take a punch in the nose.
No, but we're never called to do these.
Boggess spends 6 weeks composing his answer to Lisa Hazelwood.
Miss Lisa Hazelwood, I write this letter hoping that my words will be of some help to you. and that you and your family will find peace for your own souls and be reconciled to Christ.
A very long letter, which describes in excruciating detail both murders, his remorse, and his salvation.
I know that sounds harsh, but it is also...
The confessions and the apologies, like those I'd heard before, seem strangely detached and mechanical, as though he is trying to convince us he's become fully human, but doesn't know how.
Scriptures, you can give your grief to Jesus and find...
He laces the letter with Bible passages he suggests may comfort her and dispel her anger.
17 and 4, Ephesians 4:32, Colossians 3:13, Matthew.
But the letter has exactly the opposite effect on Lisa.
He's in jail on death row, and he's preaching to me. And that's what I'm thinking, you know. I mean, nothing he can say is going to make it any better. And nothing he can do.
Now she is certain that she wants Boggess to die.
He can be right in the eyes of God, but he's not going to be right in my eyes ever.
So far from gaining anything like forgiveness from his 6 weeks' effort to write the perfect letter, Boggess had succeeded only in making Lisa angrier. Even that news seems hardly to affect him.
I'm not after her sympathy, and she may never forgive me, or the rest of her family. I don't want their forgiveness for myself. It's not necessary. God has forgiven me of my sins, and I've secured eternal life in heaven, except in Christ's blood.
But in a way, Boggess is thriving on death row. He's developed a commercial enterprise that has brought him both friends and money. His pen pal, Connie Crispin, takes Boggess's paintings back to Europe with her to sell them for him.
Little small rental car.
She already has sold many.
This is probably
Major Catherine Cox of the Salvation Army has been buying, exhibiting, and selling his artwork in Dallas. When her efforts don't satisfy him, he takes her off his visitors list.
This is a pencil.
Lawyer Estrada is also handling Boggess's paintings. And pen pals all over the world are acting as his agents.
An art show.
He has a website where he sells greeting cards with pictures he's painted of life on death row. He's even worked out a plan for spending the money he's making.
My desire is to have my body cremated, and I want to have my ashes scattered inside a monastery in France where Vincent van Gogh once lived and painted. Within the walls.
So he's been shopping by mail for a mortuary that performs economical cremations.
Once I have an execution date, then I'll make sure they get the money prior to my execution. For them, it's convenient because they'll know the exact day when I'm going to be deceased, when to come pick up the body, and where.
He is repulsed by the idea that when he's executed, he may be buried anonymously in a plywood coffin in the prison cemetery, where the grave markers carry only the person's prison number and the date of his execution. I'd been coming to see Boggess for about a year when he tried to rope me into his art enterprise.
Howdy, howdy.
How you doing?
Good, good. I've got they may ask up front, or they may need you to ask up front for me later. I've got a drawing that I want to give out to you, and 2 additional letters of permission for Bible.
He's brought a piece of art with him to the visiting room.
About picking up artwork.
A drawing of a cowboy.
Extra letter for Bible.
He wants me to forward it to one of his agents.
So they can hold it up as a test.
But the warden has become suspicious of the drawing, and suddenly the interview is terminated.
Why Bible Strider was asking after me.
I'm getting all sorts of signals that we have to quit.
Back in his office, the warden has peeled apart the matting of the cowboy drawing and found another drawing hidden inside of the prison fence. The warden is angry. Sending out pictures of prison security is forbidden. He suggests I might have become part of an escape plot. He confiscates Boggess's art supplies and puts him in a lockdown cell for 6 months. I wouldn't see him again for more than a year. Meanwhile, the executions continue. In the 3 years I spent reporting on death row in Texas, 69 men and 1 woman were put to death, 8 in a single month. About noon, on the day an inmate is to die, he is driven from death row 22 miles to the death house at another prison called The Walls in downtown Huntsville.
We will escort him into the execution chamber. And we ask him to come up to the table, hop up, and lay down. Five officers at that point go to strapping him down. And once they're through strapping him down, they leave, leaving the chaplain and the warden in here. Then the execution team, they'll come in from this way. They'll establish an IV into each arm that's strapped to these boards. And it'll run back through this little window to an IV stand that we have in this room back here.
It's cold in here.
Yes, sir. We try to keep the air conditioning running in these 2 areas here.
Probably the first air conditioning they felt in 10 or 15 years.
Quite some time, yes, sir. Once they have a good IV, good saline solution drip going, then we'll call for all the witnesses to be brought back. At that point, he says whatever he wants to say.
Who do they say it to?
Usually, if they have any personal witnesses in this area, in the witness area, they say it to them. Once he's through with his last statement, then the warden will give the signal for the first of the 3 chemicals to be administered. Usually, he goes to sleep within just a very few seconds.
In January 1998, Leslie Geish's number comes up. He is the legally blind kidnapper and murderer I'd met my first day on death row. Geish is famous here for having taken the ride to the death house years earlier and lived to tell about it. He came within minutes of execution before receiving a stay.
After I got back from the walls, it is when you notice how much tension you were under because you feel like somebody just beat you with a 2x4. You don't realize it, but you've just clenched up so tight that when you finally relax, you feel like you've been worked over.
When Geish returned to his cell block following that narrow escape, he described the execution chamber to his friend, Clifford Boggess, who drew a picture of it. Now, almost a decade later, Geish is back inside the death house. It's already past the scheduled 6 o'clock execution time. Geish's attorney, Maury Levin, is making frantic last-minute phone calls on the pay phone outside the prison, still trying to save him. Levin thinks the U.S. Supreme Court may be considering another stay. It sounds far-fetched.
Maureen, can you just give us a
Sound
quick
really
What did you just hear? It's obviously great news.
The Supreme Court granted a stay of the execution.
On what grounds?
They didn't say. It's a 5-4 vote, and that's all we know. And they're going to be conferencing the issues, and that's all we know.
Where do you go from here?
I don't know. I'm going to try and go see Leslie.
What would you tell him?
That he got to stay.
Those who saw Geish back in his cell in the following days described him as a man in shock. He told them he had heard the officers laughing as they prepared the chemicals that were to kill him. He would have it all to go through again just 3 months later. And this time, there would be no stay.
I've been here for almost 150 executions.
I've watched the best friends I've ever had, the people who've been like family to me for over 13 years now, I've watched them go and die. It's like in a psychological experiment. You take all these people and you put them together and you put them under stress, design stress even, put them through adversity and put them like that, and you see what happens to these people. Step 2 of the experiment, you kill a few of them off. Step 3 is do this again and again and again for 10, 15, or 20 years. And then you look and you see what psychological effect the stress, the years, and the deaths have caused to the few people that are left. And I feel like I'm the result of that experiment.
The long, indefinite wait for Clifford Boggess's execution exacts a different kind of agony on the families of his victims. All the Colliers in St. Joe are now dead, except for Jack.
Out through here.
He still tends his murdered brother's beehives.
Living. See him working in and out there?
Frank was the main beekeeper of you brothers?
Yeah. Yeah, he enjoyed working with them all the time. I never thought that much of them myself.
Jack lives alone on his farm outside St. Joe.
Yeah, I guess the horses are down there in the barn, James.
His nephew, James Cooksey, drives in from Dallas every few days to see if the old man is all right. And together they somehow keep the place going.
He says feed them in the trough around there.
Came to the house first, and they told me that Frank had been killed. I drove up to the store, and the store...
Cooksey describes a family tortured by thoughts of the murder. Every family conversation returning to the same morose subject. Cooksey is certain that the life of his mother was shortened by the tragedy and the frustration of being trapped in a story with no ending. Jack says his goal is to outlive Clifford Boggess. Everyone is waiting for Clifford Boggess to die. Jack Collier, the Hazelwoods, me, Clifford Boggess himself. All waiting to see what the execution will reveal. In the spring, the Supreme Court denies Boggess's last appeal, and his name appears on the list of scheduled executions. June 11th, 1998. He had requested that date. It was his birthday, and he liked the idea of going out on the day he came in. With his execution imminent, Boggess has been moved to a lockdown cell. He can leave it only under heavy guard and in handcuffs.
Then I got my rosary, which is another custom design job. I have really big hands and I like the extra large beads.
He has switched religions from Protestant to Catholic. It seems more solid to him, and he says too many Protestants support the death penalty.
In my pocket or hold it in my hand when I'm executed.
His conversion became official the day he received his execution date, and was more important to him, he says.
So that's pretty much what I'm finishing up my time with.
A Franciscan priest from Boston will be coming to counsel him in the last days.
Writing some letters to some people.
Pretty busy.
Very busy. Got my little calendar up here. I got 8 days left. Counting down to June the 11th. I specifically wrote them down on there, 87654, to remind me. Home sweet home, this is what I'm leaving behind.
Where's this picture going to go, you think?
He has written a letter to the newspapers in Whitesboro and St. Joe, apologizing to friends and families of the two old men. Yes, he writes, I am guilty of my crimes. Like the thief on the cross at Calvary, I go willingly to meet my Maker. It is my hope and prayer that this gives you some measure of peace. But it doesn't.
With sincerity and respect, Clifford Boggess.
What do you think of that?
Jim Hazelwood, Lisa's father, is contemptuous of Boggess's attempt to compare himself to the biblical thief.
So like the thief on the cross of Calvary, I will.
As usual, nothing is working. No redemption seems possible. In St. Joe, Jack Collier has read the letter too, and the long-awaited news that the execution is finally about to happen. Neither brings him any peace. Instead, they have triggered the old crushing memories so powerfully that when he tries to speak, nothing but sobs come. Boggess has been given back his art supplies and is hurrying to finish a final drawing. A crucifixion scene, Jesus promising heaven to the thief on the cross next to him. The drawing seems to be a final pitch to God.
What do you suppose you'll talk about?
Connie Crispin arrives from Germany to say goodbye and attend his execution. For 8 years, they have been best friends.
It's going to be tough.
It will.
But now there is tension between them. She considers his conversion to Catholicism frantic, and his plans to have his ashes scattered in France a waste of money, and has told him so. So he has turned his attention to other pen pals, and given much of her visiting time to them. All his old friends are being replaced.
If he gets executed, he wants me at his execution.
2 years earlier, Boggess had asked his lawyer, Robert Estrada, to be one of the 5 witnesses for him.
If you don't want to be there, I won't be offended. I'll understand. Well, I can't turn him down.
But now, Boggess has taken Estrada off the witness list, and he wants no members of his family to be there. He says he's replacing them all with his new Christian family.
May 15th, 1998, 27 days left. Dear Debbie, thank you for writing to me. Do not, and he underlined, do not try to come visit me. It's too late for all of that now. The time to visit would have been during the previous years that I've been here.
I am allowed one last visit with Clifford Boggess. I wonder if he'll show any signs of cracking under the strain, or if he'll be as cocky and cheerful as ever.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good, other than the fact that I'm super, super busy trying to get everything done.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm doing great. For me, there's nothing to be sad about.
He insists he is now eager for death and certain of heaven. But it has occurred to him that there he might meet the 2 old men he murdered, Frank Collier and Roy Hazelwood.
So I thought about it for a while and waited until late one evening, turned out all the lights in my cell and turned off the radio and got real still and quiet and spent some time praying and asking God to open my heart and talking to Jesus and everything. And then finally addressed them by name and asked them to forgive me and apologize to them. and said, you know, I'm sorry, you didn't deserve what I did to you, and please forgive me. I wish I could take it all back. I shouldn't have done those things. And something reached down inside my gut. I mean, it physically hurt down in my gut, and I sobbed. Not just a tear or two, but sobbed, like a cry from the gut like I hadn't had in years. And I believe in my heart that they have forgiven me.
This isn't the first time he's talked about tears. But like other signs of sorrow or remorse, I've never seen any. The constant grin reminds me of what his Uncle Carl had said. He's a great pretender. But which is pretense? The talk of tears or the grin? Now and then there is a flicker of doubt that says he's not quite sure he has sealed the deal with God.
Sometimes I have the occasional doubt of, yes, but what if I get to heaven and Jesus says, yeah, but you killed 2 people. That's way worse than what I was talking about in the Bible, and sends me off to some sort of punishment. I don't think that's going to happen now, but occasionally, I guess you'd say Satan tries to tempt me with those doubts, and I chase him away and say, no, that's ridiculous. Get out of here. I know what my Bible says. I wonder if there's anything back there in those first couple of years of my life, if there's something there that would mitigate in my favor when it comes time for my judgment. I don't know.
After 3 years, I had run out of questions.
Oh, there will be something. June 12th, you'll think of something. You'll think of something. Yeah, June 12th, you'll think, oh, we should have asked him this. Always the way it works out. Okay. Take care. I see you when I see you. Might see you on down the road one of these days. Decades from now.
Something should have happened. Some revelation. But it hadn't. Unless it's that, in the end, Clifford Boggess couldn't care any more about his own life than he had a dozen years earlier for the lives of the 2 old men. He'd done and said all the things he could think of to make himself fully human. He never stopped trying. It just hadn't worked. The Hazelwood family heads for the execution. Lisa and her father Jim have decided they have to be there. Jack Collier, who's 97 now, has stayed behind in St. Joe.
He is the closest friend I've had in my life. I'd do anything in the world if I could to stop it. The people who are my family in here are dead. The last one dies tomorrow night.
Lisa is afraid. Afraid that in the death chamber, Boggess may look directly at her. And what will she do if his death is agonizing? Jim Hazelwood has begun to worry about something else. Will his father soon be sharing heaven with the man who murdered him?
There's nothing I can do to stop it. I haven't even been able to cry for him. I cry a tear or two and then it's gone. I can't cry no more.
At 6 o'clock, Jim and Lisa Hazelwood entered the prison to witness the execution.
As we were walking across the street, I can't even describe how I felt. Scared to death, I guess.
And then come the witnesses Boggess has chosen. 3 of his Christian pen pals and the Franciscan priest from Boston. His German friend, Connie Crispin, has decided not to be there. As usual, there isn't much to see. I sit outside feeling lousy, even though inside, Clifford Boggess is probably having the time of his life. I keep thinking of what his Uncle Carl said about him. Poor little son of a bitch, he said. That seems about right.
I will be expecting to see something. I will be looking for Jesus.
And of course, he's looking at me when I walk in. And I'm thinking, well, does he know who I am? You know, he turns his head over and he says, well, hello there. You know, he said, I'm sorry for all the pain I caused you. Said a prayer, and he took one deep breath and he went to sleep.
Clifford Boggess was pronounced dead at 6:21 p.m., 8 minutes after the lethal chemicals were introduced. As a last statement, he wanted to say that he was sorry for the murders of Roy Hazelwood and Frank Collier. To his friends, he said he loved them and that he was glad that they were a part of his life. He then said, remember that today I'll be with Jesus in paradise, and I'll see you real soon.
The prison chaplain, who had attended over 50 condemned men, said later that Clifford Boggess in his last hours was more at peace than any of them. Clifford's adoptive mother, Shirley, had asked me to call when it was over.
They let him call me about an hour before the execution. And he told me that he thanked God for letting me be his mother and that he loved me. Those were the last words he said to me is, I love you. I'm going to make it, because he told me he's waiting for me.
Mr. Collier?
Yeah.
How are you?
All right.
I know that you've learned that Clifford Boggess was executed last night. What do you think about it?
What do I think about it? Well, I think it is okay, don't you? He was entitled to what he got, if not more. It was too easy compared to what he did to my brother Frank. He says he went to heaven, but he says he's the one that said that. Jesus Christ, I don't think, said that.
Did it make sense to execute Clifford Boggess? Did the relief and the sorrow it brought others add up to justice? Did killing him lend dignity to the 2 old men he murdered? or only diminish us all. And had the execution actually punished Clifford Boggess? Three months afterwards, Lisa Hazelwood says she's glad she doesn't have to think about Clifford Boggess anymore. Doesn't have to wonder what he's doing. Even so, his death had not been enough.
And the fact that he got to pick his birthday, that's still just, I mean, I suppose if that's the way you want to do it, that's fine. My papa didn't get to choose the day he died. He got to choose his, I just feel like it was too easy. And yeah, I feel like he finally got what he wanted in the very end. He had accepted it. He had time to accept it. He had time to get things right with his life and to have God in his life. And, you know, that's not, you can't say that for these other two men. We don't know whether they had God in their life or whether it was right, and they had no time to say goodbye, and this man did.
I got an envelope from him, postmarked June 11th, the day he was executed. A photo of one of his last paintings. The execution as he expected to see it. A door in the prison wall. A tunnel. And a light. The ashes of Clifford Boggess were mailed to one of his pen pals in Europe. She would carry them to the monastery at Saint-Remy, France, where Vincent van Gogh was once confined, and scatter them there, just as Boggess had planned.
He earned it.
His execution?
His execution, yes. I think that he ought to feel like that he's getting his money's worth. A guy that would commit the kind of murders that he did. I just can't imagine a guy like that. Can you?